The stars did not care about borders. Captain Elena Vasquez had said that once, half joking, to her first officer, during a long, quiet watch. Now, staring at the red warning line drawn across her navigation screen, she was not so sure the stars agreed with her. The line marked the edge of a region called the Hollow Reach. It was not on any Terran star chart until 3 years ago, when the Athari Concord first made contact with humanity. The Athari were tall, pale-skinned beings with large black eyes and soft voices, and they were polite in almost every way except one. They refused, absolutely and without exception, to discuss what lay inside the Hollow Reach. When human diplomats asked, the Athari simply said, "It is not for you, it is not for anyone." Then they changed the subject. That answer might have been enough for the diplomats back on Earth, sitting in comfortable offices with warm coffee, and no stars outside their windows. It was not enough for Captain Vasquez. It was not enough for anyone who flew a starship for a living, because a starship captain learns quickly that the universe does not respect polite refusals. Sooner or later, something always crosses the line. This time, the something was a distress signal. It had come in faint and broken, picked up by a listening post near the edge of Terran space 6 days ago. The signal used an old emergency code, one that had not been active for almost 40 years. It was the code for a Terran vessel called the Meridian Star, a colony transport that vanished without a trace back when humanity had barely a dozen ships capable of leaving the solar system. Every school child on Earth knew the story. 312 colonists, gone. No wreckage, no debris, no explanation. Just silence, for 4 decades. Now, suddenly, that old code was broadcasting again, and it was coming from somewhere deep inside the Hollow Reach. Captain Vasquez stood on the bridge of the TFS Horizon's Call, a mid-sized exploration cruiser with a crew of 42, and looked at the tactical display. The red line sat just ahead of them, a thin, curved wall of light with nothing behind it but darkness and old fear. "Talk to me, Marcus," she said, without turning around. Commander Marcus Chen, her first officer, stepped up beside her. He was a broad-shouldered man with a calm, steady voice, the kind of voice that made frightened crew members feel a little less frightened. "Signal still repeating," he said. "Same distress code, same rough coordinates. It's coming from about 2 light years past the boundary. No response to our hails. No change in strength." "Could it be a trap?" asked Lieutenant Amara Singh, the ship's chief science officer, from her station near the front of the bridge. She was young for her rank, barely 30, but she had the sharpest mind Vasquez had ever worked with. Pirates sometimes use old distress codes to lure ships in. "Maybe," Vasquez said, "but pirates don't usually operate near territory an entire species refuses to enter. And this code is old, older than most pirate crews would even know about." Chief Engineer Tomas Reyes spoke up from the engineering station. He was a stocky man, with grease permanently under his fingernails, even though the Horizon's Call had automated systems that made such things unnecessary. "Old habits," he always said. "Captain, if there's even a small chance those are real survivors in there, we can't just leave them. 40 years trapped somewhere, waiting. That's a long time to hope somebody's listening." Vasquez nodded slowly. She understood the weight of that thought. Every officer on this bridge had grown up with the story of the Meridian Star. It was humanity's oldest unsolved mystery among the stars, a wound that had never healed because nobody ever found out what happened. "Get me Fleet Command," she said. It took almost an hour for the reply to come back, relayed through 3 different communication relays. The message, when it arrived, was short and careful, the kind of message written by people who did not want to be blamed later, no matter what happened. Fleet Command authorized the Horizon's Call to investigate the signal at the captain's discretion, but reminded her that the Terran Federation had a standing agreement to respect Yathari territorial boundaries. Any decision to cross the line was hers, and hers alone, to make. Vasquez almost laughed. Typical. When the decision was easy, headquarters loved to take credit. When the decision was hard, they handed it right back down the chain. She turned to face her bridge crew. 42 people depended on her judgment today, and so, perhaps, did 312 people who had been missing for 40 years. "Options," she said. Chen answered first. "We could report the signal to the Yathari and let them investigate. It's their territory." "They've had 40 years to investigate it," Singh pointed out. If there was ever a rescue attempt, we never heard about it. The Athari have made it very clear they don't go into the Hollow Reach either. That was the strange part, the part that had bothered Vasquez since the signal first appeared. The Athari did not just forbid other species from entering the Hollow Reach. As far as anyone could tell, they never went there themselves. They treated the entire region the way a person might treat a locked room in an old house, a room nobody opened, not because they were told not to, but because generations of fear had built up around it, until nobody even remembered exactly what was inside, only that it was better left alone. I think, Vasquez said slowly, that the Athari are afraid of something in there, something old, and I think whatever it is, it hasn't stopped 312 of our own people from possibly being alive this whole time. The bridge was quiet. Everyone understood what she was about to say. We're going in, she said, slow and careful. Sensors at full range, weapons on standby, shields ready but not raised, so we don't look aggressive. If we see anything that even hints at danger, we retreat immediately. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, Captain," answered her. The Horizon's call turned its nose toward the red line on the display, and Vasquez gave the order to cross. Nothing happened. At first. That was almost worse than if something had. The ship glided past the invisible boundary, and the stars outside looked exactly the same as they had a moment before. No alarms triggered. No alien fleet appeared. No ancient voice boomed a warning across the comm channels. Just empty space, quiet and dark, stretching out ahead of them like any other patch of the galaxy. Sensors show nothing unusual, Singh reported after 20 minutes. No ships, no stations, no debris fields. It's just empty. Keep scanning, Vasquez said. Whatever the Athari are afraid of, it's not going to announce itself with a welcome sign. They traveled for 6 hours at a careful, measured pace, deeper into the Hollow Reach than any known Terran vessel had ever gone. The distress signal grew stronger the whole time, a steady beacon calling them forward. Vasquez found herself glancing at the tactical display more often than she needed to, waiting for something to appear. Some shape in the dark that would explain why an entire species treated this region like a graveyard nobody wanted to visit. It was Singh who found the planet. Captain, I'm reading a Class M world dead ahead, about 3 hours out at current speed. The distress signal is originating from the surface. She paused, studying her readouts more closely. Captain, there's something else. I'm picking up structures. Large ones, metallic. They don't match any known architecture, Terran or Athari. Vasquez leaned forward in her chair, put it on screen. The image that appeared showed a green and blue world, ordinary enough at first glance, clouds swirling over oceans and continents. But scattered across the surface, visible even from this distance, were dozens of massive structures, towers and domes, and long curved spines of dark metal that seemed to grow out of the ground like something half plant, half machine. They were arranged in patterns too precise to be natural, spreading out from a central point in a shape that reminded Vasquez uncomfortably of a spider's web. Those aren't Athari, Chen said quietly. Those aren't anything I've ever seen. Age estimate? Vasquez asked. Singh worked her console for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Based on erosion patterns and the way vegetation has grown around the base structures, I'd estimate at least 10,000 years. Possibly much older. Captain, this technology predates every spacefaring species we know of, including the Athari themselves. The bridge went very still. 10,000 years was not a number people used casually. It was older than written history on Earth. It meant whoever built these structures had been gone, one way or another, since before humans had learned to write their own names. And the distress signal? Vasquez asked, her voice quieter now. Coming from the center of the pattern, Singh said. Right in the middle of the largest structure. Captain, I'm also detecting a small amount of Terran standard hull material on the surface, near the source. It's a very weak reading, but it's there. The Meridian Star. It had to be. 40 years ago, some accident of navigation or misfortune had carried a Terran colony ship straight into the one place in the galaxy an entire species refused to go, and it had landed there, among structures built by beings who had vanished long before humanity ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. Take us in, Vasquez said. Slow approach. I want full sensor sweeps the entire way down. Tomas, I want engines ready for an emergency departure at a moment's notice. Marcus. Sound quiet alert. No sirens, no announcements. Just get everyone to their stations. The ship descended through the atmosphere with careful precision, engines humming low, every sensor aboard straining to catch the smallest hint of danger. The structures grew larger as they approached, and up close, they were even stranger than the orbital scans had suggested. The metal, if it was metal, had a faint dark sheen that seemed to drink in the sunlight rather than reflect it. Long grooves ran along the towers in patterns that might have been decoration, or might have been something else entirely, some kind of writing in a language no living being could read. I'm not detecting any active power signatures, Singh said as they settled into a hover above a wide, flat clearing near the base of the central structure. Everything reads as dormant. Whatever this place is, it's been asleep a very long time. Let's not wake it up then, Vasquez said. She stood from her chair. Marcus, you're with me. Singh, I want you on the away team too, in case we find anything that needs a scientist's eye. Reyes, keep the ship ready to lift the second we call. Everyone else, standard away mission protocol. Light weapons only. We are not here to fight anybody. We're here to find our people, if they're still down there to be found. 20 minutes later, Vasquez stood on solid ground for the first time in weeks, the alien structure rising above her like a mountain made of black glass and shadow. The air smelled clean, faintly sweet, like a forest after rain. Birds, or something like birds, called out somewhere in the distance. It did not feel like a place of danger. It felt, strangely, like a place that had simply been forgotten, left to sleep undisturbed while the rest of the galaxy moved on without it. The distress signal led them through a wide opening at the base of the tower, an entrance large enough to drive a shuttle through, its edges worn smooth by 10,000 years of wind and rain. Inside, their lights cut through absolute darkness, revealing a vast chamber whose ceiling disappeared somewhere far overhead. Vasquez felt very small, standing there, the way a person feels standing at the bottom of a canyon and looking up. Captain, Singh said softly, her voice echoing strangely in the huge space. I'm reading organic material ahead, human, and Captain. Some of it is still alive. Vasquez's heart pounded once, hard, against her ribs. Show me. They moved forward together, boots echoing on a floor so smooth and seamless it might have been poured in one single piece. And there, in the beam of their lights, huddled against the base of a massive dark pillar covered in the same strange grooves as the tower outside, they found them. Survivors. Old, thin, wrapped in tattered clothing that had once been Terran Federation uniforms, their faces lined with decades of hardship and fear. Not all 312, not even close, but a handful, perhaps a dozen, huddled together in the dark, staring at the newcomers with wide, disbelieving eyes. An old man, his hair long and white, pushed himself slowly to his feet. His voice, when it came, was cracked and rusty from disuse. You should not have come here, he whispered. You have to leave, now, before it wakes up. Behind him, deep within the pillar, something that had been silent for 10,000 years began, very quietly, to hum. The hum grew louder, a low vibration that Vasquez felt in her teeth before she truly heard it with her ears. She raised a hand, and every member of her away team froze in place. What's waking up? She asked the old man, keeping her voice calm even as her pulse raced. What is this place? The old man's name, they would later learn, was Nathaniel Cole, and he had been a junior engineer aboard the Meridian Star 40 years ago, a young man of 22 when the colony ship first crossed into the Hollow Reach by accident, chased off course by a navigational error during a violent ion storm. Now he was 62, his body worn thin by 4 decades of survival, in a place that offered little food and less hope. We don't fully know, Cole said, his eyes darting nervously toward the dark pillar. We've had 40 years to guess, and we still don't know for certain, but we learned enough to survive. This place, it's a machine, the whole structure, maybe the whole planet, and it sleeps, mostly. But sometimes, if you go too deep, or make too much noise, or bring the wrong kind of light. He trailed off, staring at the bright beams from the away team's equipment. It notices. How many of you are left? Singh asked gently, kneeling beside an elderly woman who looked barely strong enough to sit upright. 14, Cole said, and something in his voice cracked. 14. Out of 312. The others died over the years. Sickness, mostly, and accidents. And some. He did not finish that sentence, and nobody asked him to. Vasquez looked at Chen, and a silent understanding passed between them. 14 survivors, all of them elderly or frail, none of them capable of a long walk, let alone surviving in this alien tomb any longer than they already had. They needed to be evacuated, and they needed to be evacuated now, before whatever was humming in that pillar decided to open its eyes. Marcus, call the ship, Vasquez said quietly. Tell Reyes to bring the Horizons call down as close to this entrance as he safely can. We're leaving, and we're taking every one of these people with us. Chen nodded and stepped away, murmuring into his comm unit. But before he had finished the call, the humming changed pitch, and a soft blue light began to spread along the grooves carved into the pillar, tracing patterns that had been invisible in the darkness a moment before. The light crept upward, branch by branch, vein by vein, illuminating the entire chamber in a cold, pulsing glow. That's new, Cole whispered, backing away with the instinctive fear of a man who had learned, through hard experience, exactly what such changes usually meant. It's never done that before, not in 40 years. Captain, Singh said, staring at her scanner with wide eyes. Power readings are climbing. Fast. Whatever's in that pillar just went from completely dormant to... Captain, this is a lot of energy. This is more energy than our entire ship generates. The blue light spread further, racing up through the ceiling and down through cracks in the floor that Vasquez had not even noticed until now, revealing that the strange grooves covered not just the pillar, but the entire chamber, the entire tower, perhaps the entire structure outside. The whole building was one enormous circuit, and it was coming alive. Everyone move, Vasquez ordered, all pretense of calm gone from her voice now. Get these survivors up and moving toward the entrance, now. The away team scrambled into action, gently but urgently helping the frail survivors to their feet, half carrying those too weak to walk on their own. Vasquez took the arm of an elderly woman, who could not have weighed more than 90 pounds, and half guided, half carried her toward the distant square of daylight that marked the chamber's entrance. Behind them, the humming became a deep, resonant thrum that shook dust from the ceiling far above, and then, with a sound like 1,000 ancient doors opening at once, machinery long silent began to move. Vasquez glanced back once, just once, and what she saw would stay with her for the rest of her life. The central pillar was splitting open along seams that had been invisible moments before, folding outward like the petals of some monstrous mechanical flower, and within it, wreathed in blue light, something vast and geometric began to unfold, joint by joint, segment by segment, rising toward the distant ceiling on limbs of black metal that gleamed like polished obsidian. Go, 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 she shouted, and the away team surged forward, half running, half dragging the survivors toward the entrance. They burst out into daylight, just as the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. Behind them, the entire tower was awake now, blue light spilling from every window and crevice, and similar light was beginning to flicker to life across the other towers, scattered throughout the ancient complex, as though the awakening of one structure had triggered the others, a chain reaction sweeping outward across the whole forgotten city. The Horizon's call descended through the trembling air, engines roaring, and settled onto the clearing with more speed than grace. The cargo ramp dropped before the landing gear had even finished extending. Move, move, move! Chen bellowed, and the away team poured up the ramp, carrying and supporting the survivors as fast as they could manage. Vasquez was the last one aboard, and she turned in the cargo bay doorway just long enough to see the central tower fully open, revealing a shape within it that defied easy description. It was enormous, easily the size of a large starship, built in angles that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle she viewed them from, wrapped in blue light, and trailing long, segmented limbs that ended in points sharp enough to cut through solid rock. It had no face that she could see, no eyes, nothing that suggested a living creature at all, and yet she felt, with a certainty she could not explain, that it was looking directly at her. "Ramp's closing, Captain," someone shouted, and she stepped back, letting the heavy door seal shut between her and that impossible sight. "Reyes, get us out of here," she called into her comm, as she ran for the bridge. "Full power, now." The Horizon's call clawed its way back into the sky, engines straining, the whole ship shuddering as it fought against gravity and fear alike. On the bridge, Vasquez threw herself into her chair and stared at the aft sensor display, watching the ancient city fall away beneath them, still lit with that eerie pulsing blue. More and more towers joining the awakening with every passing second. "Status," she snapped. "We're clear of the atmosphere," Reyes reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Engines at 90%. I can push higher, but I don't love our odds if something goes wrong." "Do it," Vasquez said. "Get us to orbit, and then get us out of this system entirely." "Captain," Singh said, her voice unsteady. "I'm reading multiple objects launching from the surface. Captain, they're fast. Faster than anything I've ever tracked. They're already gaining on us." Vasquez turned to the main view screen, just as the aft sensors picked up the pursuit. Dark shapes, sleek and angular, tore up through the atmosphere behind them, trailing streaks of blue light like comets. There were dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, pouring out of the awakened city and rising into the black of space with terrible, silent speed. "Options," Vasquez said, forcing her voice to stay level even as her hands gripped the arms of her chair. "We can't outrun them at this rate," Reyes said grimly. "Not in normal space. If we can get enough distance for a clean jump, we might make it to hyperspace before they close the gap, but it's going to be close." "How close?" "Too close for comfort, Captain." Vasquez looked at the survivor's quarters status on her console. 14 names, 14 lives, that had already been trapped in this nightmare for 40 years, and deserved better than to die escaping it. She looked at her own crew, 42 men and women who trusted her to bring them home, and she looked at the swarm of ancient machines closing in from behind, faster with every second. "Take us out," she said. "Fastest safe course to jump distance. Marcus, get me everything Singh's sensors can pull on those pursuers. If we're going to survive this, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." Chen relayed the order, and the ship surged forward, engines screaming at their absolute limit. Behind them, the swarm of ancient sentinels followed, patient and relentless, closing the distance meter by meter, as though 10,000 years of sleep had done nothing to dull whatever purpose had once been programmed into their cold, mechanical minds. On the science station, Singh worked furiously, her fingers flying across her console, as data poured in from every sensor the ship possessed. "Captain, I'm getting some strange readings from the pursuit craft. They're not firing weapons. They're not even trying to communicate. They're just following, matching our course exactly, staying just outside effective weapons range. Hurting us," Chen said quietly, "or escorting us. Depends how you want to look at it." "Or testing us," Vasquez murmured, watching the tactical display with narrowed eyes. "Waiting to see what we do." The horizon's call streaked toward the edge of the system, the swarm of ancient machines trailing behind, like a silent, patient shadow, and somewhere in the back of Vasquez's mind, a cold certainty began to settle. This was not simply a defense system reacting to intruders. This was something with intention, something with purpose, something that had waited 10,000 years for a reason nobody alive could remember, and whatever that reason was, the horizon's call and everyone aboard her had just become a part of it. "Jump point in 90 seconds, Reyes called out. "They're accelerating," Singh said sharply, "closing the gap. 50 seconds to intercept range at current speed." "Punch it," Vasquez ordered. "Everything we've got." The engines howled, the whole ship groaning under the strain, and the stars outside began to blur and stretch as the horizon's call pushed toward the very edge of what her engines could survive. Behind them, the swarm surged forward in one final burst of speed, closing the distance with terrifying ease, and for one long, breathless moment, Vasquez was certain they would not make it. Then the universe folded around them, and the horizon's call vanished into hyperspace, leaving the ancient city and its awakened guardians behind in the dark. For a moment, silence filled the bridge. Nobody spoke. Nobody quite dared to believe they had actually escaped. "Report," Vasquez finally said, her voice hoarse. "We made the jump clean," Reyes said, sagging back in his seat with visible relief. "No damage, no pursuit, as far as I can tell. We're clear, Captain." A ragged cheer went up across the bridge, but Vasquez did not join in. She was staring at the sensor logs Singh had pulled during the chase, at the strange, patient behavior of the ancient machines, at the image of that vast, unfolding shape within the tower that had felt, impossibly, like it was watching her.
"Captain?" Chen said quietly, noticing her expression.
We got them out. 14 survivors, safe, after 40 years. That's a win. I know, Vasquez said slowly. But Marcus, think about it. That thing wasn't trying to kill us. If it wanted us dead, it had 100 ships and 10,000 years of technology to make that happen. And it didn't. It let us go. Then why chase us at all? Vasquez looked at the sensor data again, at the strange pulsing patterns Singh had recorded from the swarm during the pursuit. Patterns that, the longer she looked at them, began to resemble something disturbingly close to a message. I don't think it was chasing us to stop us, she said quietly. I think it was chasing us to see where we'd go. And Marcus, if I'm right about that, this isn't over, not even close. Behind them, unseen and unheard across the vast gulf of hyperspace, the ancient city continued to wake, tower by tower, and far away, in a place no living being had visited in 10,000 years, something ancient and patient began, for the first time in a very long while, to remember what it had once been built to do. The Horizon's call dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Terran space 3 days later, battered but intact, carrying 14 survivors who had not seen a proper medical bay or a warm meal in 40 years. Word of their return spread through the Federation faster than Vasquez expected, and by the time the ship docked at Meridian Station, a crowd of reporters, officials, and relatives of long-dead colonists had already gathered, drawn by rumors that the impossible had happened, that the Meridian Star's survivors had finally been found. Vasquez had little time to enjoy the relief of a safe return. Within an hour of docking, she was summoned to a secure conference room aboard the station, where a very serious-looking fleet admiral named Okonkwo waited alongside 2 Yathari diplomats she recognized from previous negotiations, their pale faces unusually tense, their large black eyes fixed on her the moment she entered the room. Captain Vasquez, Admiral Okonkwo said without preamble, you have caused something of a diplomatic incident. I found 14 missing Terran citizens who had been trapped for 40 years, Admiral, Vasquez replied evenly. I'd call that a rescue, not an incident. One of the Athari diplomats, an elder named Vethus Kal, leaned forward, his soft voice carrying an edge of something that might have been fear. Captain, do you understand what you have done? The Hollow Reach has been forbidden for 3,000 years of our own history. We do not know its full extent. We do not fully understand what sleeps within it, and you have woken it. I understand you're scared of it, Vasquez said, choosing her words carefully. But I'd like to understand why. Nobody has ever explained that to us. Just warnings and silence. Vethus Kal exchanged a glance with his colleague before answering. 3,000 years ago, before the Athari Concord existed in its current form, our ancestors made contact with the Hollow Reach. They believed, as you did, that ancient ruins meant ancient treasure, ancient knowledge, things worth claiming. They sent expeditions. Most never returned. Those that did came back speaking of machines that judged them, tested them, and found them wanting. Entire fleets were lost. Entire cities were destroyed, not by weapons turned outward in conquest, but by whatever consequence followed judgment. After that, my people made a choice. We would never enter the Hollow Reach again, and we would warn every species we encountered to do the same, so that no one else would suffer as we did. The room was quiet for a long moment. Vasquez thought of the vast shape unfolding within the tower, the patient swarm that had chased but never attacked, the strange sense that something ancient had been watching her, weighing her. You said it judged your ancestors, she said slowly. Judged them for what? We were never certain, Vethus Kal admitted, but the survivors of those early expeditions spoke of tests, trials of courage, of wisdom, of restraint. Some who passed such trials were allowed to leave unharmed. Others, who acted with greed or cruelty or fear, were not so fortunate. Admiral Okonkwo cleared his throat. Captain, sensor data from fleet listening posts near the Hollow Reach boundary indicate a significant increase in energy signatures over the last 3 days. Whatever you woke up in there, it isn't going back to sleep. We need to understand what we're dealing with, and we need to understand it quickly, because right now, an ancient and extremely powerful unknown force is active less than 2 light-years from Terran territory, and we have no idea what it intends to do next." Vasquez thought about it for a long moment. Then she said, "I'd like permission to go back." The reaction in the room was immediate and loud. Admiral Okonkwo objected. The Athari diplomats objected even more strongly. Vethis Cal, rising halfway from his seat in obvious alarm. "Captain, that is an extraordinarily dangerous proposal," Okonkwo said. "With respect, Admiral, it's already dangerous whether I go back or not," Vasquez replied. "The difference is, if I go back, we might actually learn something useful. If we just sit here waiting to see what an ancient alien defense network decides to do next, we're at its mercy either way. I'd rather understand our enemy than wait to be surprised by it. And Admiral, I don't think it's our enemy. Not yet. It had every opportunity to destroy my ship and it didn't." It took 2 more days of arguing, briefings, and careful diplomacy before Vasquez received official authorization for a second expedition into the Hollow Reach, this time with clear scientific objectives, backed by additional resources, and accompanied, somewhat awkwardly, Vethis Cal himself, who insisted on joining the mission despite his own people's ancient fear of the region. "If humanity insists on walking into danger," the elder Yathari told her privately before departure, "then perhaps it is time my people stopped simply watching from the sidelines and warning others away. Perhaps it is time we understood, together, what we have all been afraid of for so long." Nathaniel Cole, against the strong advice of the medical staff who had spent the last 2 days trying to nurse 40 years of malnutrition and hardship out of his aging body, also insisted on returning. "I lived beside that thing for 40 years, he told Vasquez, his voice stronger now than it had been in the ancient chamber, though still thin and worn. "I've seen it in more moods than anyone alive. If you're going back in there, you need someone who understands its rhythms, even a little. I owe it to the people who didn't make it out. I want to know why we were trapped there in the first place. I want to know if there was ever a reason, or if it was all just an accident nobody bothered to explain." The Horizon's Call departed Meridian Station 5 days after its dramatic return, carrying a expanded crew that now included Vethis Cal, Nathaniel Cole, and a team of Terran and Athari scientists eager to finally understand a mystery that had haunted both species for generations. Vasquez stood on the bridge as they approached the red boundary line once more, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. "Last chance to turn back," she said quietly to her senior officers, gathered around the command chair. Nobody suggested it. "Then let's go find some answers," she said, and gave the order to cross. This time, the crossing felt different. Perhaps it was only her imagination, sharpened by memory. But Vasquez thought the empty space beyond the boundary seemed to hum faintly, as though the entire region had become aware of their presence the moment they entered it. Sing's sensors picked up subtle energy fluctuations almost immediately, patterns that had not been present during their first approach. "It knows we're here," Sing said, studying her readouts with a mixture of fascination and unease. "The whole region, Captain. I'm reading faint energy signatures spreading across dozens of systems, all synchronized somehow. Whatever we woke up, it's not confined to that one planet anymore. It's everywhere in the Hollow Reach. 10,000 years is a long time to spread roots," Cole murmured from where he stood near the science station, his eyes distant with old memory. "We used to feel it sometimes, in the quiet hours. A kind of pressure in the air, like something enormous breathing very slowly, somewhere far away. We thought we were imagining it, after so many years alone. Maybe we weren't." They approached the ancient homeworld cautiously, sensors at maximum range, weapons on standby but not raised. The blue glow that had lit the towers during their frantic escape was still visible from orbit now, a steady, pulsing light that outlined the ancient city like veins beneath skin. But there was no swarm waiting to intercept them this time, no pursuit, no aggression at all. "They're letting us approach," Chen said, watching the tactical display with visible unease. "Why?" "Maybe it already made its decision about us," Vasquez said. "Maybe this time, it's waiting to see what we do with the chance we've been given." They landed near the same clearing as before, the towering central structure looming above them, fully awake now, light pulsing gently along every groove and seam like a slow, patient heartbeat. Vasquez led a careful expedition inside, Vethis Cal and Cole walking close beside her, the Athari elder's steps hesitant despite his earlier bravado, 3,000 years of inherited fear, written plainly across his pale features. The great chamber inside had changed since their last visit. Where before it had been shrouded in darkness, now it was filled with soft blue light, and the enormous shape they had glimpsed unfolding from the central pillar stood motionless in the center of the room, fully revealed for the first time. It was even larger than Vasquez remembered, easily 40 meters tall, built from countless interlocking segments of dark, glass-like metal that seemed to absorb the light around it, even as it glowed faintly from within. It had no face, no obvious sensors, nothing that marked it as a thinking, aware creature rather than simply an enormous machine. And yet, as Vasquez stepped into the chamber, she felt, unmistakably, that it turned its attention toward her. A soft chime sounded, echoing through the vast space, and then, astonishingly, a voice spoke, not from any visible source, but seeming to emerge from the air itself, translated by systems Vasquez did not understand, into words she could comprehend. "You returned," the voice said. It was neither male nor female, neither warm nor cold, simply present, ancient, and patient, beyond easy understanding. Few do. Fewer still return by choice. Vasquez forced herself to stay calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "We came to understand," she said carefully, "not to take, not to harm. We want to know what you are, and why you tested us, and what happened to the people who came before us." There was a long pause, long enough that Vasquez began to wonder if the voice would answer at all. Then it spoke again, and what it said would change everything humanity and the Athari Concord thought they knew about the Hollow Reach, and about the ancient war that had ended, unfinished, 10,000 years before either species had learned to build a single starship. "I am the Sentinel," the voice said. "I was built to remember a promise, and to keep it, no matter how long the keeping required. You wish to understand. Very well. Sit, small ones, all of you, and I will tell you why I was made, and why I have waited so very long for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to finally ask." The Sentinel's voice filled the vast chamber like water filling a bowl, patient and unhurried, and Vasquez found herself sitting on the smooth floor along with the rest of her small delegation, listening as 10,000 years of silence finally began to speak. "Long before your species learned to shape fire," the Sentinel began, "there lived a people called the Terran. They were not the first to reach the stars, nor were they the strongest, but they were curious, endlessly curious, and their curiosity led them across 1,000 worlds, seeking knowledge, seeking connection, seeking to understand the shape of the universe they had been born into." As the Sentinel spoke, faint images began to form in the air above its massive form, ghostly and translucent, showing glimpses of a civilization long vanished, cities of pale stone and living light, ships that sailed between stars on currents of energy. Faces, if they could be called faces, belonging to a species tall and slender, with skin like polished amber, and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies within them. "The Ketharan built wonders across this region of space," the Sentinel continued. "Cities that sang with music older than memory. Gardens that stretched across entire moons, and in their pride, in their endless hunger to understand everything, they built something they should not have. A weapon, meant only as a final safeguard. A way to protect their greatest achievements should some terrible enemy ever threaten to destroy them entirely. They called it the Hollow Choir. I was one small part of that vast defense network, a single sentinel among a great many, built to watch, to judge, and if necessary, to act." The images shifted, growing darker. Vasquez watched, transfixed, as the peaceful cities in the vision began to burn, as ships of strange and terrible design descended from the stars, as the amber-skinned Ketharan fought and fell against an enemy the Sentinel did not name. "The enemy that came was not evil, not entirely," the Sentinel said, and something in its ancient voice carried a weight that might have been sorrow, if a machine could truly feel such a thing. "They were desperate, driven from their own dying stars, searching only for a place to survive. But desperation makes monsters of the gentle and the cruel alike, and when the Ketharan refused to share their worlds, the war that followed consumed everything. My makers activated the Hollow Choir in their final days, not to win the war, for by then it was already lost, but to protect what could still be saved. To buy time for those who might escape. And then, one by one, my makers died, and the war ended not in victory, but in silence, because there was no one left on either side to declare it finished. The chamber fell quiet. Vethus Cal, beside Vasquez, had gone very pale, his large eyes wide with something between horror and understanding. "So you kept fighting," Vasquez said softly, "even after they were gone, even after there was no one left to give the order to stop." "I kept my promise," the sentinel corrected gently. "My makers asked me to watch, and to judge, and to protect what remained of their legacy from those who would misuse it. They did not ask me to fight a war that no longer had an enemy. And so, for 10,000 years, I have watched. I have judged those few who found their way into this place, testing not their strength, but their character. Those who came seeking to plunder, to conquer, to claim power without wisdom, I turned away, sometimes gently, sometimes less so. Those who came seeking understanding, who showed courage without cruelty, curiosity without greed, I allowed to leave unharmed, carrying only what knowledge they had earned through their own wisdom, never more." "And us?" Vasquez asked. "What did you judge when my crew first came here?" The sentinel was quiet for a long moment, and when it spoke again, there was something almost like warmth in its ancient voice. "I judged a captain who risked everything, including the safety of her own people and her own standing among her leaders, to save strangers she had never met, people who could offer her nothing in return but gratitude. I judged a crew who worked together without hesitation, who protected the weak among them without being asked, who fled not from cowardice but from wisdom, understanding when a fight could not be won, and choosing survival over pointless sacrifice. And then, having been given the chance to remain safely away, I judged a captain who chose instead to return, seeking understanding, rather than simply accepting fear. Captain Vasquez, you passed the same test that broke 100 civilizations before yours. You asked why, instead of simply running, or simply attacking. That question has been rarer, across 10,000 years, than you might imagine." Vasquez felt a strange mixture of pride and humility settle over her, and beside her, she noticed Nathaniel Cole quietly wiping tears from his weathered face. "What happens now?" she asked. "You've woken up. Your whole network is active again, spreading across this entire region. The Athari fear what that means. My own people worry it might mean danger. What do you intend to do?" "I intend to finish the task I was given," the sentinel said. "For 10,000 years, I have watched and judged in silence, waiting for those with the wisdom to ask the questions no one else dared to ask. I did not expect that day would ever come. And yet, here you are. Perhaps it is time, at last, for the hollow choir to rest, and for its purpose to be handed forward, to those who might use its knowledge with greater wisdom than my own makers, in their final desperate hour, were given the chance to show." Vethus Cal found his voice at last, though it trembled slightly as he spoke. "You would share this knowledge, after 3,000 years of turning my own people away, of destroying every expedition we sent?" "Your people came seeking treasure, Elder," the sentinel said, not unkindly. "Weapons, power, ways to strengthen your own hand against your rivals of that era. That is not wisdom. That is only another kind of hunger, and hunger alone has never been enough to earn what I protect. But perhaps, having learned fear so thoroughly across 3,000 years, and having chosen at last to return not for conquest but for understanding, alongside those who showed you the way, your people too might finally be ready." A soft rumble echoed through the chamber, and slowly, along the vast curved walls surrounding them, more of the strange grooves began to glow, revealing patterns and shapes that Sing, watching with wide, fascinated eyes, immediately recognized as data, vast quantities of it, encoded in a form her instruments were only beginning to decipher. "What you see here," the sentinel said, "is the accumulated knowledge of the Ketharan civilization, their science, their history, their art, their philosophy, their mistakes, laid bare, so that those who follow might learn from them, rather than repeat them. It has waited 10,000 years for hands wise enough and hearts humble enough to receive it without immediately turning it into another weapon aimed at the stars." Vasquez rose slowly to her feet, looking up at the vast ancient guardian towering above her. "Why us? Why now, after 10,000 years of turning everyone else away?" Because you asked the right question, Captain, the sentinel said simply. You did not ask what you could take from this place. You asked why it existed at all, and whether the fear surrounding it was truly deserved. That single question, asked honestly and without hidden greed, is worth more than any army that has ever stood before these doors. Outside, across the ancient city, and the many other worlds scattered throughout the hollow reach, the pulsing blue light that had spread since the Horizon's Call's first desperate flight began, slowly, to change. Where before it had burned with the restless energy of a system fully roused from 10,000 years of sleep, now, it settled into something calmer, steadier, like a great slow breath finally released, after being held for an unimaginable span of time. The other sentinels will stand down, the voice continued, as this knowledge passes to those who will carry it forward with wisdom. But Captain Vasquez, Elder Vethis Cal, I must ask something of you both in return, before that transfer can be completed. A promise, freely given, must be answered with a promise of equal weight. My makers asked me to protect their legacy from those who would misuse it. I ask now that you and your peoples promise the same, to guard what you are about to receive, not as a weapon to be wielded against one another, but as a lesson to be shared, carefully and wisely, so that the mistakes which doomed the Ketharan are never repeated among the living. Vasquez looked at Vethis Cal, and for the first time since she had met the cautious, fearful elder, she saw something new in his expression, something that looked almost like hope breaking through 3,000 years of inherited dread. I think, Vasquez said slowly, turning back to face the ancient guardian, that's a promise both our peoples can make. The transfer of knowledge took 3 full weeks, and it changed both the Terran Federation and the Athari Concord in ways neither had fully anticipated when Captain Vasquez first crossed that red boundary line in search of an old distress signal. It began slowly, carefully, the Sentinel releasing its ancient archives in measured pieces rather than all at once, watching, always watching, to see how each new fragment of knowledge was received and used. Vasquez remained on the surface with a rotating team of scientists throughout the process, sleeping in temporary quarters set up within the shadow of the Great Tower, watching as generations of accumulated Ketharan wisdom slowly found its way into the hands of 2 younger species, still learning what it meant to reach for the stars responsibly. Vethis Cal proved himself an unexpected ally throughout those weeks. The elder Yathari, who had entered the hollow reach trembling with 3,000 years of inherited fear, emerged from the experience transformed, eager to share what they learned not just with his own government, but openly, honestly, with the Terran Federation as well. The old habit of secrecy that had defined Yathari dealings with the hollow reach for so long finally began to crack, replaced by something new, a cautious partnership built on shared understanding rather than shared silence. For 3,000 years, Vethis Cal admitted to Vasquez one evening, as they sat together near the base of the Great Tower, watching the alien sunset paint the sky in shades of violet and gold, my people believed that fear itself was a kind of wisdom. We taught our children to avoid this place, to never ask why, to simply accept the warning and move on. I wonder now how much we lost, across all those centuries, by refusing even to ask the question you ask so easily. It wasn't easy, Vasquez admitted. Plenty of people back home thought I'd made a terrible mistake, crossing that line in the first place. Some of them probably still think that. And yet you were right to ask, Vethis Cal said. Sometimes wisdom is not avoiding the fire entirely, but learning, carefully, how to hold it without being burned. Nathaniel Cole and the other 13 survivors of the Meridian Star returned to Terran space aboard a hospital transport during the 2nd week of the knowledge transfer, finally receiving the medical care and quiet rest they had earned through 40 impossible years of survival. Before he left, Cole sought out Vasquez one last time, finding her on the observation deck of the Horizon's Call, watching the ancient city below. I used to wonder, all those years, whether any of it meant something, he said quietly, whether we were trapped there for a reason, or just unlucky. Bad navigation, bad timing, bad luck, nothing more. He shook his head slowly. Now I know the truth is a little of both. We were unlucky to end up there, but maybe it wasn't for nothing, in the end. Maybe we were exactly the reason the Sentinel finally had someone worth waiting for, when your ship followed our old signal into that place. You survived 40 years in an alien tomb, Vasquez said gently. Whatever else happened, that took more courage than most people could ever imagine having. Cole managed a small, tired smile. We didn't have much choice, Captain, but thank you for saying so. By the time the knowledge transfer neared completion, word had spread far beyond the Hollow Reach, and both Terran and Yathari leadership found themselves facing an unprecedented diplomatic opportunity, one built not on old fears and forbidden borders, but on a shared discovery that belonged, in some sense, to both species equally. Admiral Okonkwo himself traveled to the Hollow Reach in its final days to oversee the formal establishment of a joint research station, a small but significant first step toward turning what had once been a place of ancient terror into a place of shared learning and careful cooperation. I owe you an apology, Captain, Okonkwo told Vasquez during a private meeting aboard the newly designated research outpost. When you first proposed returning here, I thought it was recklessness. I see now, it was something closer to courage, and the Federation is better for it. With respect, Admiral, Vasquez replied, I think we got lucky. The Sentinel could have judged us very differently. If my crew had panicked during that first escape, if we'd opened fire out of fear, this entire outcome might have gone very differently. Perhaps, Okonkwo admitted, but luck rarely favors those unwilling to take the first difficult step. You took that step, Captain, when plenty of others would have simply reported the signal and let the Athari handle a problem they had spent 3,000 years avoiding entirely. On the final day before the Horizon's call departed the Hollow Reach for the long journey home, Vasquez returned one last time to the great chamber where she had first heard the Sentinel's voice. The ancient guardian stood motionless in the center of the room, its blue glow steady and calm now. No longer the restless pulse of an awakening system, but the quiet light of something finally at peace with the promise it had kept for 10,000 years. You are leaving, the Sentinel observed as she entered. For now, Vasquez said, but I don't think this is goodbye. Not really. Your knowledge is going to change a lot of things back home, and I imagine there will be plenty of scientists eager to keep learning from what you've shared. Then perhaps I will finally have new company across the long years ahead, the Sentinel said, and Vasquez thought she detected something that might, in a machine that had waited 10 millennia for a single honest question, have almost been described as contentment. I have one final thing to offer you, Captain, before you go. Not knowledge this time, but a warning, freely given, as one who has watched civilizations rise and fall across 10,000 years of patient observation. I'm listening, Vasquez said. The knowledge you carry home is powerful, the Sentinel said. Power, wielded without wisdom, was what doomed my makers in the end, not because they were cruel, but because they grew so certain of their own righteousness that they forgot to ask the same question you asked me, upon your return. Not simply, what can this do for us, but also, what might this cost others, and are we prepared to bear that cost honestly, rather than pretending it does not exist? Carry that question with you, Captain Vasquez, long after you have left this place behind. It will serve your people better than any weapon or invention I could ever hand you. Vasquez nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling over her like the ancient dust that still clung faintly to the chamber's dark stone floor. I'll carry it, she promised, and I'll make sure it's remembered, long after I'm gone. Then my long watch was not wasted, the Sentinel said, and the promise I kept for 10,000 years has finally found the hands worthy of receiving it. The Horizon's call lifted off from the ancient world for the final time that afternoon, carrying with it not just a ship full of tired, grateful crew members, but the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between two young species, and the vast, patient legacy of one that had vanished, long before either of them learned to look up at the stars. Behind them, the great towers of the Hollow Reach continued to glow softly in the gathering dusk, no longer symbols of ancient terror, but quiet monuments to a promise finally fulfilled, and a question, honestly asked, that had changed everything. As the ship climbed toward the stars, Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge, watching the ancient world fall away behind her, and allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, a small, tired, genuine smile. They had crossed a forbidden line, searching for old ghosts and impossible hope, and what they had found instead was something far greater than either species could have imagined. Not a weapon waiting to destroy them, but a patient guardian waiting, across 10,000 long and silent years, for someone brave enough and humble enough to finally ask why. And as the horizon's call turned toward home, carrying knowledge that would shape the future of two civilizations for generations to come, Vasquez understood that the story of the Hollow Reach was not truly ending here. It was only just beginning, and this time, humanity would not be walking into that future blind or alone.